Hey, welcome. You guys made it to the end of the day. Thank you so much. We have an amazing panel, and this is a vast discussion topic. So we're just going to jump right in, and mostly each person, I'm going to go topic by topic, and then each person can talk about tips, tricks, things that worked, things that didn't work.
I think we first need to talk about the lack of coffee at this conference.
The Reverge booth has Nespresso.
They do.
The what?
So, let's. Reverge, they're right next to you.
Okay,
Right
let's
next to
go there.
GoPro, there's Nespresso.
We'll be moving this panel.
So we're going to start off just talking about writing and developing your VR experience. And each of the people here on our panel have created content, including myself. So I'm just going to start with Jessica and go down the line and start talking about writing and developing your project.
Oh, yeah. So I worked on, I don't know if maybe most of you saw it, some of you saw it. We call it World Tour, which is the first film that we made using a rougher prototype than maybe what you saw on the floor that we're working with GoPro on right now, called Jump, with the Jump rig. And we really weren't sure what was going to work or not. And so I basically went around and I actually started with, since, when someone says, go film the world with the thing, you never really know where to go with that. So I decided that I was going to go off of a Kurt Vonnegut poem that talks a little bit about experiences and being on Earth. So then I used that as a framework and just went to places that kind of fit the bill. So places that were varied. I went to Arecibo. I went to Iceland, to Tokyo, just to sort of see how the world really worked with using something like this, and then I guess that was sort of what we did, and then we came back with the footage and saw what worked and what didn't, and started crafting it from there. So that was sort of my process.
All right. And
So
go for it, Jim.
yeah, for GoPro, obviously a lot of you know us for action content, very high thrill-seeking. We've been shooting spherically for actually a couple of years, but now that these platforms are available, so people can actually view them, anytime we go out to shoot something spherically, we're always looking at, is it straight for a narrative piece? Because a lot of people kind of just associate us with action content. But if you look on our YouTube channel, there's a lot of kind of mini documentaries, which are kind of the more in-depth versions of things you see in our launch reels. So we set out to both shoot spherically and 2D at the same time. And that can be pretty cumbersome because you're trying to figure out, how do you plan for these shots? How do you plan for multiple deliveries in a spherical and a 2D world? Most people would think, okay, shoot spherically and just do a center cutout, 2D extraction, boom, there's your 2D cut. So what we do is we look at scripting kind of the talking points to a documentary. How would we kind of drive the story from a documentary or a narrative point? And that will dictate pretty much where camera placement is for us. If we're writing a specific part for the documentary, we're going to look at what is driving the camera movement within that particular scene or that story. So you may think that GoPro doesn't do a ton of narrative stuff, but if you actually take a look at a lot of our work, there's a lot more kind of in-depth narrative things, and you're going to start seeing a bit more of tried and true pieces that you've seen of GoPro over the years. So we have content from probably about 3.5 years ago that we've shot spherically, and you're going to start seeing come out these little mini documentaries of like Lion Whisperer with Kevin Richardson, things like that you've seen in 2D from us, and kind of how that story evolves with how we were able to kind of either write for that kind of narrative piece or what dictated how we set up out to go out and shoot these spherical pieces.
All right. And Arthur from Jaunt?
So I'm Arthur. I'm from Jaunt. We've been creating cinematic VR for 2.5 years now. We've been working on creating an end-to-end solution. We got both cameras and software and pipeline and production tools and best practices, as well as delivery software, like a player, on lots of different platforms. And we have a studio here in LA to work with the creative community. And we started off very simple with, GoPros and filming ourselves in the office, throwing a ball around, and then we went outside and tried to film, a train arriving at a station, obviously. And so we did a lot of different experiments. We've been doing a lot of interesting productions. We did narrative content with Shannon and New Deal Studios. We did 3 pieces that were sort of an experiment in how to tell a story in VR. We did a World War II reenactment called The Mission. We did a monster movie called Kaiju Fury, which is really cool. Shannon built a whole set inside the studio. There was, a miniature city where guys in rubber suits would destroy the city. It was awesome. And then we did The Black Mass, which is a horror piece. And that actually is currently still one of our more favorite pieces, more popular pieces, because it doesn't have a lot of narrative content, but it's short and it really evokes emotion. It's scary, right? And it works well. Plus, we did a Dolby Atmos audio production for that, which really works well. We're trying to focus on sort of high quality content. We've therefore been working on our own camera. So we finished the first few of those that we'll be shooting with this fall. And we're hoping to create a system where you can basically put down a tripod, put a camera on it, hit record, and walk away. And that's very important, especially if you're doing like a concert or you're doing a sports event or something like that. And you don't need to have a cameraman around. It's very it's a very easy to use system. And afterwards you take the content, you run it through a pipeline to stitch it, and then you can use off-the-shelf editing tools to do post-production, like inserting titles or creating cuts, or we can use Dolby Atmos tools for doing audio production, and then re-upload the finals into the cloud where they get rendered out for distribution to a lot of different platforms. And actually on the distribution end, you need to produce different versions for different platforms. So because the lower end phones don't play high resolution video so well, so you need to have low res versions, you need to have monoscopic versions, you need to have high res versions at low frame rate, you need to have high res versions at high frame rate, and you need to have super high resolution for the Vive. So we render out all of those. But you then need to make sure that your source material, of course, is of high enough resolution. Anyway, we've been doing this for a while, and we produce a lot of different types of content, and there's a lot more to come. And hopefully in cooperation with New Deal, because that was a really fun project. And I'm a big fan of Bubl, by the way.
That's good. Thank you.
And now Bubl, and that's their camera.
Yeah, and it's actually a good transition because one of the things that we focused on from the very onset of actually creating a product was, what is the workflow that's going to be required in order to create the content you want to deliver? And so when we started looking at the entire ecosystem, we actually didn't start with the camera, we started with the software. And Bubl is actually a software company more than a hardware company. It just so happened there wasn't really software out in the world that would do what we needed to do, so we took a chance. And so far, so good. It's our first product, and what we really wanted to enable people to do was go out and capture whatever it is they wanted to capture and deliver it quickly. We wanted to be able to have a camera set up at a concert, you turn it on, you let it go, and it captures your content. You are at home or you're with your family, you want to be able to showcase what that moment feels like. Well, how are you supposed to do that with spherical content or with VR today? And the workflow in order to do that is still pretty difficult, and we're all trying our best to actually work through that. And I think what we've done so far was provide people with a tool so you can actually begin creating that VR or spherical-based content now. You can go out, capture it, upload it. Well, not even have to upload it. Most of the time you can actually just stream it directly to your mobile phone, and that content is stitched and ready to go. So if you are a television studio, or you're trying to produce a very quick production to see what it feels like to actually produce that VR content, well, we want to provide you with the tools so you can get it done quickly and easily.
Fantastic. Just a little bit about New Deal Studios. We have produced content from huge visual effects sequences to web content to feature films and virtual reality. And today we're showcasing a music video, which has a lot of narrative and story for a band called Galvanized Souls. So check out our music video. And then we've used many different cameras and platforms, from World War II gun cameras that we've manipulated to small spherical cameras, and it's a very exciting time. And in terms of developing content for ourselves, we do start with writing a script and planning and doing some storyboarding, but one of the topics that came up for discussion is, if you're doing live action, is about storyboarding and prevising and how much that is a help in developing your story and making it cohesive and getting it to whichever screen. So do you want to talk about that?
I mean, it's sort of, so generally when you storyboard, right, you're seeing like a square. It's the same with editing too. You just essentially you're looking at one frame, one direct way of seeing something. And something I've been doing is actually looking bird's eye view, more planetary, more like drops in a bucket, where you see a spherical view and there's someone in the middle. So respect to that dot in the middle, what goes on around it. So that's sort of how I previs stuff, yeah. Or I guess storyboard, less previs, kind of previs.
I was going to say, have you used previs or do you use storyboards? Or
I do, but in a very rough way, I think. Generally, if you try to coordinate something, the magic of what's revealed in an experience is generally not planned. So I try to embrace that.
Probably
Great.
take it over the top, being a visual effects artist before joining GoPro, is I'll actually do the traditional route. I'll take virtual cameras in Cinema 4D and Nuke, and I will create basically a very crude proxy environment, and I will kind of walk around the environment with a virtual camera and kind of plan that out, and I'll stage where the camera's going to be. So I'll do more of like a traditional previs with that. Also, the best thing to do is, if you're storyboarding in a traditional way and you're sitting there and you're not a very good sketch artist, but you're just drawing pencil drawings, the best thing to be aware of is obviously you're very restricted as to what you can do and what the camera can do in a spherical. It's a very big undertaking of planning out a moving shot with a spherical rig. So as much as you can previs, even if it's a live action previs, and just do some test plates with it, that would be very recommended to do ahead of time before you get on set, or, just shoot as much as you can and plan out. Even if you put an X on the piece of paper and say, this is camera, this is subject, do it.
That's what I do. That's
as
far as it goes.
Yeah, you don't have to go crazy and go and nuke and build, crazy environments pre-hand, but if you have access to it, sure, use it.
I find this is a really important topic to me because it's difficult, especially in spherical video, to find it in post. It's nice to know what you're going to be shooting and have a sense of your story. And then when you get to set or you get to a location and things need to change, you can do that very quickly.
Another really cool thing to do though is actually just stand, like go where you want to shoot and just stand there and
Yes.
look around, because that's essentially what you're going to be doing, right? Like just actually stand there and say, okay, what actually happens in this space? How does the space affect who's there? How they move? How weather might affect it? I don't know. Like the
Yes.
nuances of a space and the location actually really help lend itself to what's actually going to happen. So beyond blocking, that's important if you can do it.
So we use the Theta Cam for scouting out locations, for example, and that helps you also sort of see, where you want to place people in the scene. That's another tool to use.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things we like to do is like live stream previews. So like a lot of cameras will let you live stream a little bit, and most of them can't record. But I mean, like there's so many companies today even talking about like providing that live stream for the director so they can actually sit, check out the scene, see how it feels. Because lighting a spherical piece is not the same as lighting your traditional piece, and cinematographers are really, some of them are finding it a hard time. It's not our fault, but I mean, at the same time, you have to understand that lighting is going to affect your shot, because I mean, lighting really makes the scene, right? And you really want to be able to go in there, check the time of day. You want to, Theta Cam is great for that, but You can also get one that'll live stream it while you're actually there. And if you can do that, then you can start setting up the scene. One thing we like to do is, I don't know if everyone remembers this, it's gonna show my age, the show called Punk'd. And what they would do is, it's candid camera type of thing. So you're watching it from a remote location. So a lot of the times we'll set up a camera, put it there, go look at it from someplace else. And then sit there and figure out, okay, as time changes throughout the day or how movement changes throughout the day, it's the same type of experience. And then when you're actually shooting it, there are no cameras in place because you don't need them there. It's the same type of idea. You don't want the camera to be seen in that type of shooting environment. It kind of fits the same for us.
And next, I want to just talk about a topic about 2D versus 3D. And this, there's so much exciting technology to make life easy coming very soon. And we've made choices as a studio, like, well, let's do this 2D and let's shoot this 3D. And there are definitely different experiences. So I thought if each person could speak to that a little bit.
I mean, the jump rig films in 3D, like stereoscopic. So I've been spoiled, and that's all I've ever seen. But it is actually weird, the magical moment. So I work really closely with jump engineers. We're still working through, it's still in prototype staging, or in the prototype stage, I guess. But when I was there in the really early days of it, one of the engineers was like, I was looking through it, I'm like, oh, okay, I think that's fine. He's like, it's stereo, isn't it cool? I'm like, I guess, I don't really. So he like flipped a switch and it was mono, and I'm like, oh wow, that's
Big difference.
big difference, yeah. And it's even less, like some people, you actually show the difference between stereo and mono, and they're like, oh, it's stereo, and you've like, it's been mono the whole time. So sometimes people don't actually understand the differences, or they don't see it. And for me, it's mostly like a feeling. Like if you're in a space, like if depth is really a thing, you feel it more than you see it. So for me, that's been the big draw.
Yeah, we actually did a couple of experiments right now, like between 2D stereoscopic and 3D, just to see if anybody would actually notice and how the difference would be. And I mean, like, honestly, it really just depends on what you're trying to shoot, at least from our point of view.
Yeah, totally.
And because sometimes we'll shoot like a regular scene, and then we'll reshoot the exact same thing in 3D. And some people are like,
Yeah,
it's like, I got my 3D glasses on.
like Icelandic rocks,
Same idea.
awesome in stereo,
Yeah.
terrible in mono. It's like,
Yeah.
but some other scenes, like they totally, I mean, there's no magic added by doing it.
Exactly.
But
It
yeah.
just depends.
There's a technical and a creative choice in why you would do things. Sometimes you may need to shoot stereo for resolution, so you may have to shoot higher resolution just for scaling down, because a lot of the HMDs aren't quite there yet in terms of the resolution per eye. They're getting there. There's a lot of new ones coming out every month. So there may be technical reasons why you would shoot stereo versus a creative decision of thinking of depth in a scene. Something that if you have subjects from foreground to background stacked, how would that look? If you're moving your head around it, you don't want it to look like a cardboard cutout. So what are you doing? You're painting in depth, or you're getting in there and rotoing things. Sometimes even when you shoot stereo, you have to go in there and have a visual effects artist or have someone clean up some of those images, because the real sell for stereo is when you're looking around and you have any of those parallax offset issues. There's a good example with the jump rig, and the demo from the garage scene is looking at that Z-depth and that parallax offset that kind of really stands out for the jump algorithms working there.
Yeah, I mean, it also is a nice way to craft like a location and like blocking and like how things are too, because stereo definitely lends itself to a richer experience. But if there's no richness and there's no depth in the scene anyway, it kind of just feels, it would be flat, regardless.
I also find people who are new to VR, they're so overwhelmed visually that they don't have a chance to perceive the depth. And so as you experience more and more, it's easier to have that, to recognize it.
I mean, it's definitely a component of making it realistic, right? I mean, it's one of the many components. I think that, if you have a great story and a great visual experience and a great, auditory experience, then you have the greatest likelihood to create a realistic and immersive experience. And, I think, stereo is just one dimension of the visual experience, but for example, high dynamic range is another experience. The real world has a much greater dynamic range than a screen. So if you actually think about what that looks like in a headset, you don't, it's not realistic. You can look straight into the sun and your eyes don't hurt. Whereas in another aspect, for example, is convergence distance, right? I mean, your convergence distance is fixed, so that also reduces the realism. But over time, those things will hopefully get fixed by different display technology and different rendering. And the reality, it'll become more and more part of the whole experience.
How's everyone doing? We're talking a little bit of tech, a little bit of creative. Hands, you want more creative? Or hands, you want more tech? More tech. Okay, great. Just checking in. So that is all very helpful, talking about stereo. And I think even just like thinking about your action, the action of your scene, and is it coming at camera? Is it going across camera? How does that affect your story? How about talking about planning some of the action of the scene? That each piece is unique, and it affects the stitching. It affects the experience in stereo.
It also affects like post-production, right? Like
Yes.
a lot of the time now, like if we're shooting a tracking shot that's going to go around a particular area, and it's like, okay, usually you want to get that crane that would actually follow it, or you get a drone and you're just going to follow it. And now you can actually just get like one camera, stick it there on the pole, and everyone just run around it. And you can actually do all the post afterwards by like tracking the scene. So it depends on, well, I'm hoping the future will bring out a way for, if you're going to still create one directional film, people are still going to do it. And we're going to be able to build cameras that you're going to look at that single direction, and you're going to look at like stereoscopic, or you're going to look at your spherical, and they will be near equivalent. You're going to start looking at the techniques required in order to post-produce the particular piece you're trying to create as well. Because video editing is, time consuming. And if you can start thinking about how do I utilize this technology in order to edit the piece I'm trying to create before you create it, make that choice between a single point of view camera or a spherical camera, you're going to start to see a lot of differences and a lot of speed in the way you're actually going to produce that piece of that piece of content. Can't wait to see it actually.
Yeah, a lot of these technical considerations for stereo versus mono spherical is really dependent on where you're going with it. Who's your audience? What is your platform that you're going to deliver to? Is it YouTube 360? Is it for Gear VR? Is it for exhibition and dome? All that stuff has to be answered before you ever turn a camera on. And there's a lot of planning that has to go into it. And it may sound like a mountain of technical and creative planning that you need to do hand, but it will save you exponential time in post and visual effects and budget if you do all this type of planning, if you test these shoots, if you know that you're going to do an action shot in stereo, you're going to have that much more to plan out in terms of motion blur, how high a frame rate you need to do, what is the resolution you need to cover, are you going to need to stabilize that? Like there's all these considerations that may seem like this huge checklist and it's overwhelming. Okay, why do I even want to shoot in spherical and let alone spherical stereo? So, if you just go bit by bit and you kind of understand the compensations you have to make, maybe you have to pay a little bit more on budget for a visual effects artist to do this, or what if you say, I'm just that mom and pop shop, I'm a boutique, it's me and 5 friends, we're getting into spherical, do we need to worry about all these considerations? I would say, not right away, just get out there and shoot, mess up, learn. Learn that if you shoot at 24, it's not going to really work too well as if you had shot 30 or 60. So, I think every one of us here has shot a lot of bad spherical content, and we've learned a lot from that. And that's kind of like the same thing for all of you is go out there and make bad mistakes. Go out there and learn from it so okay, maybe I shouldn't have that subject there because they're going to get cut in half because they're on a zenith or a native point. These type of things that we're getting very technical talking about, that we have a little bit of privilege that we get to work at these cool companies, but it's all the stuff that we're working on, from New Deal to Jaunt to Bubl to Google and GoPro, is that none of this is going to succeed if not all of us in this room are educated, know what's at hand and available to us. So, we need everybody in this room to understand and be educating each other as to like, what are these best practices? What are the pitfalls? Everybody kind of sharing that knowledge with everybody. It's not something that you want to kind of covet in there. The best way for VR as a platform to succeed is for us to just educate each other on like what can go wrong or what worked well. I don't have anything that I have to hold a secret to say. Like, I would share everything with anybody in this room of everything I've screwed up on a spherical shot, or what settings I use on a GoPro if it's 2.7 and 4.3 mode. Like, ask away. We're here to kind of like share all that knowledge that we've already kind of fell over.
And there's so much to learn. I mean, there's a piece of content being made now, like from gaming and, gaming directors and developers that have already been creating in 360. And so a gaming director is working on a big project. And visual effects and the digital manipulation and understanding all of the technical that we know from 2 decades of developing digital effects. And then even lessons in feature films, like creating a project. Like if you look at a project timeline, like production's a very small part of it. Like going out and acquiring the image or the performance. And so part of the development and the planning and the testing is the fun. And then you're much more prepared and you'll have a better project when you get to acquiring. And then all the pieces really do come together nicely in post versus having to kind of shove it through or reshoot or fix. Do you want to talk at all about any more about camera action or activity? Okay.
Yeah, and basically you have to become, if you're a DP or director, you have to become a choreographer now. Like you have to know.
Rewiring, yeah. Tons.
Like everybody has a 2D mindset. You need to be thinking in 4D. You have to train your brain to think spatially now in terms of auditory and visual. You basically have to break that box of it's not here anymore. It's everything around you. It's above you. It's below you. You have to understand visual cues, auditory cues. Like where do you want to drive action? Do you want the auditory to drive action? Do you want visual to drive action? Do you want someone to pan right? Well, what are you going to do for that? So there's all these little things we kind of go back to the pre-planning phase of, sketching things out, doing previs, just kind of boxing the scene. Hey, grab this person. I'm gonna move you over here and see how it works. So there's like all these things that you have to kind of wrap your head around. That it may seem daunting at first, but once you start doing it a bit more and kind of thinking outside the box, I would also say get out of your comfort zone. Go to all the meetups, meet other people from different genres, whether they be a visual effects artist or a choreographer or a writer. I would say make friends with a lot of good writers, because writing for a spherical piece is not an easy thing. Just like directing for a spherical piece.
Play
is not
Myst.
easy. Yeah.
Yes. Like play Myst.
Yeah, play video games.
Play every science
Seriously.
game every
This is
made.
good.
Like
Gamers know about staging very well, and that's why you see a lot of big gaming companies have been buying a lot of visual effects companies in the past decade. So,
But specifically Myst, and the reason why I even bring that up, I'm a huge Myst fan. It's kind of insane, like really weird. Maybe not. I have all the books. What? That's weird. It's such a simple. So like you guys Myst, you guys all know this stuff, right? Or most of you. So it was a hypercard stack. It was a image-driven hypercard stack with some kind of crude QuickTime files embedded. I mean, and you felt like you were there, and you felt like you had purpose, and you felt like you were driven to do something. And it was not now we have freaking 16 GoPros sitting in a room, stereoscopically capturing the world around. It's like, it's not really that much of it's not really rocket science to really understand immersiveness. I think we just have to really think about it in a very simplified way. There's audio, there's characters, where they're placed, if they're addressing you or not. And to what Jim's saying is super important. It's like you just got it. It's not even really filmmaking. It's not really game developing. It's a completely new format that involves respecting the fact that someone else exists in your world. There is a world that you're creating for a person. And if you see some of the stitches actually from a bird's eye view, like if you open color and just look at it from up here, it actually does look like, if you shoot outside, indoors not so much, but it looks like a little world. It's like, the petite prince, basically, like these people existing on these little planets of experience. And if you start really understanding that as a self-contained thing, you can actually really begin to understand how you can craft those worlds to put people on. And Myst got it with Ages, and I don't know, other games have done the same thing too. So
How many gamers are in the room?
yes,
Yeah.
well, that's probably only like
That's a good.
40%.
That's like 40% of you.
40%'s good.
Yeah, I would say, if you're not a gamer, maybe check out some gaming. Look at how gaming environments are, because they've been building these environments for a very long time, and they get it because they're always working in a immersive environment. It's always been 3D. What do we see most VR people adopting to? Game engines, because of the fast pace and the way that the run times can run faster for higher frame rates and quicker interactions, which gamers need. There's like, it's 2 milliseconds off. Oh, this game's shit. I'm not going to play this game anymore. So it's like you got to think about these little things, and where you can get your inspiration and your reference from. So go play games. It's like, take the iPad away from your kid and check it out. All I know is my 10 and 5-year-old play games better than I do. There's something about little digits that are just, they get haptic way better than we do.
Details. They're so focused on details.
I think it's because their fingers are shorter, so they can
Yeah.
get the buttons.
Yeah. Like, I don't know how to do it. But I noticed, like, even with the kids, and specifically around, like, utilizing, like, an Oculus or a Vive to watch spherical content, 360 content, whatever you want to call it. The amount of attention we give to the details in a particular scene when it's 3D generated is quite a bit higher than you normally would when it's in, like, you're staring just at a flat screen. I think part of it comes from, like, sensory overload, and of course there's always that simulator sickness that people have to deal with until you got up to 90 megahertz and actually get the frame rate right. But I mean, that idea of being immersed in this very specific area changes the way we react to a piece of content. So when we start looking at the gaming environment and what we're going to be able to do with that, that's going to be fun. And the idea of, this emergence that's going to happen between, like, stereoscopic or 2D or monocular video and augmented reality, we're actually going to start to see those two worlds come together very well for gaming development as well. And that's getting really exciting. Being able to go out and film something in the real world that we create, and then actually adding these new elements that we're going to be able to interact with directly inside of a moment, that's going to be fun, because we're actually taking it from the gaming world where we used to be able to create everything, and we still will, but at the same time, we're trying to mix it into the real world as well. Now, those two things seem very foreign when you when you originally think about it, but that's all changing very quickly, and it's going to be interesting to see what people develop with it. Like, hopefully, you guys start developing with it more.
So you're
Game
basically
engines are
saying
great for
Pixels
previs
is
and
gonna
planning.
turn into real life.
Yeah. Anyway, I use game engines for previs and virtual camera, and it works really well
Yeah.
also.
And if you're daunted by saying, like, I'm not a visual effects artist, or I'm not gonna, there's some really simple tools out there to learn how to previs. There's
Like
some
what,
really-
Jim? Because I'm not a.
There's tons there. I mean, if you're not a nuke artist and you're not, simple things like After Effects, it's really easy to learn, how 3D cameras move around a 3D environment. There's
So much learning
SketchUp,
online. Yeah.
Google SketchUp is a real easy way to do previs too. These are tools that are readily available that, as you progress, you can step up into different software packages or different tools out there. And I'm sure within the next year or so that the tool level to be able to do this type of stuff is just there's gonna be so many different solutions out there for all of us to use that it'll get it easier.
Well, people are building a lot of, like, Unity engines that are actually built specifically so you can start editing it based on the HMD that you're going to be using. So you're going to be able to use Unity or the engines that people are building against it to, like, create those visual effects as well. It's fun. I like it.
Yeah, it's a big thing to be able to use real-time editing in an environment, whether it be, it'll be for cardboard, it'll be for an Oculus system, it'll be for any of these HMDs, and that's kind of like the real time is kind of the holy grail, you know, live, real time, like editing in real time. That stuff is still being worked on. There's solutions today, but they're not fully accessible to everyone yet. But I think that, you know, a lot of us here everyone here on this panel is all working towards making solutions for the masses, you know, to be able to get through these pain points of stitching multiple plates together and doing all this manual work after the fact. So, you know, yeah, I mean, that's the thing you tell somebody when we work with a lot of the production houses or studios or NFL, NHL, like all these different leagues and things like that. The first thing they say is, man, this is a lot of work, you know? Stitching is a whole new world for these people that are just straight, you know, dropping clips in a 2D timeline and just kind of hitting render versus all these things that, you know, they want to get into and they want to use it, and they see the fan experiences, they see, you know, what they can bring, you know. And obviously at GoPro, it's really easy because we make cameras that bring really cool perspectives to people. Now just exponentially grow that in a multi-cam array.
Add 15.
Yeah, and just the amount of data, like terabytes. Let's talk briefly about the frame rate and resolution. That's a big deal.
Shoot as high as you can on whole things. Done. No, those are you know, those are the ones that are currently everybody's chasing higher frame rates. We've seen that evolution since stereoscopic kind of went up and down again back in like 2009-ish. Is you had a lot of these key points with frame rates. You know, things of like people trying to bring back versions of ShowScan in a way.
Yeah, I was about to say,
You
Doug
know?
Trumbull and
Doug
ShowScan,
Trumbull,
60 FPS.
He will never give that up, and I salute him for that. Is you know, Peter Jackson with shooting high frame rate. You know, there is a reason and a choice to that.
Do you want to talk about why? About how that affects the user experience?
Yeah, and I think that ties back into the hardware that we use too, is that, you know, shooting at higher frame rates, and it really depends on the camera too. So we started the capture of that, of looking at a camera system. Is it a CMOS rolling shutter camera, which can rear its ugly head on a lot of things with very high motion, high frame rate, versus a global shutter. There's a lot of these cases of what are you shooting? And at GoPro, we shoot a lot of action. So we definitely see what issues you can run into at shooting at a lower frame rate. You know, if you have high action, you're going to deal with a lot of things with motion blur. So you want to shoot as high a resolution as you can, as high as frame rate as you can. There's a lot of little things in there within certain scenes that you can cheat if you're not doing high action within a scene. If the subject's more narrative, we're talking here like this, you don't have to shoot the highest frame rate. But if you have it available to you,
Not unless I start like jumping.
yeah, and waving your
running
hands
around.
frantically,
Yeah.
you know, people are throwing things back and forth. So
That can be right.
But Arthur isn't, I was about to
We
say.
started, you know, we did some experiments at 30 frames per second. It's clearly not good enough. I mean, 60 frames per second for VR is really, we would say, almost the minimum. You know, our camera is a global shutter camera that can shoot up to 120 frames per second. And that's useful for doing special effects, for example. If you want to do, you know, do slow down time or speed up time, you can do time lapse as well. And that, you know, that helps a lot. And in terms of resolution, you know, there's sort of two aspects to resolution that are important. I mean, one is the angular resolution. There's a very simple formula, right? If you have, say, 20 pixels per degree in your camera, then no matter how many cameras you have, you're going to have, you know, 20 times 360, you know, pixels in a sphere, right? So it's 7,200 by 3,600, and that you know, that's without using super resolution. And if you stack the images, you could potentially get super resolution, but we'll ignore that for the time being. But what does happen is that if you increase the number of cameras, you do increase the stereo acuity You know, the more cameras you have, the better quality stereo you get natively out of the system, because you have to do less interpolation. So there's a big trade-off between the number of cameras, the size of your camera, the angular resolution of your camera, the frame rate, the type of sensor you're using, the size of the sensor you're using. I mean, another thing in VR is that you don't have a place where to put the lights, so you really want to use natural light if you can. And and that's when you want to have the biggest possible sensor, so that you don't get a lot of noise in the dark areas. And that's challenging with lower end cameras. So all these things factor into the quality of the work product that you produce.
So we shot at 30, which I know now makes it seem really weak, but it actually looks fine. I think 60 for motion is depending on the kind of extreme motion that's going on, is pretty good. But with World Tour, we did 30, and I don't know, it seemed fine.
I mean, it's viewable. I mean, actually, we have done some people that actually reduced the frame rate in post because they wanted for special effect. They want to create a cinematic effect. But if you look at the same footage in 60 frames a second, you go, oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably
better.
like the
I mean, but it's on its own. It's just the same as, like, if I show you a monoscopic video, a lot of people won't notice. But if you show them then the stereoscopic version, they go, oh, that's much better, right? And it's side by side, these things do really matter. And as the quality of the headsets improve, people will become more knowledgeable and
Totally,
more critical
yeah,
of
that's
what is required.
Right.
Usually, I think you just start with your audience. If you know that your audience is going to be watching this stuff on a mobile phone in a Google Cardboard, then like some of the stuff we shoot at 15 frames per second at 1080p looks good to some of these guys. So like, it really will come down to, I mean, like technically frame rate when you're looking for higher quality stuff, absolutely. If you're going to shoot a bat mitzvah of like somebody's family, you just happen to have a camera you're going to shoot it with, you're not going to look for the highest quality video, but if you can get it, great.
I don't know how many bat mitzvahs you've shot, but
I've done a couple
You can
now.
hire him for your kids
couple.
next.
No, it's like
guy.
we put the cameras out in the world and we said people shoot and send us what you got, and now we're starting to see everything. Like we had
I
our
can
first
imagine.
baby birth the other day, and it was just like, yeah.
you must have
shot
like
it
a killer sizzle reel of just like the most random, awesome stuff.
It launches in 2 weeks actually. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
But there are certain cases. I mean, motion is difficult, of course. When the camera's moving, you really get a lot of rolling shutter effects, which you need to worry about. But you also get a lot of effects when you're in a live situation like a concert, because concerts are really hard because they have very bright lights, and some of the cameras they set the gain goes way down, the other cameras the gain goes way up, and you also have strobing lights. We had one concert where it's strobing at 60 frames per second, and you're recording at 60 frames per second, you're half a frame off, and it's all over the place. It actually creates a really cool psychedelic effect.
I was gonna say, yeah, you can like see the stitch lines
Oh,
as
yeah.
it starts to go, so you can see where the stitch is happening.
Everybody knows not to let a laser hit their sensor dead on, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
Because that would be bad.
You will replace that camera very quickly.
So it really depends on the situation of what you're trying to shoot, and especially sort of real world situations, like a situation like here. You put the camera down, you can see the speakers really well, but there's a light right there that is shining straight into one of the cameras, and that thing will be completely black, right? You'll just see a bright spot in it. So you need to handle that. So you really need HDR. That's why I need a camera with HDR, really.
Well, yeah, HDR video is a little trickier than HDR photos.
What did
There
you
you go,
do,
more
Arthur? What did you
technical.
do for the Paul McCartney concert?
A lot of post. So the challenge there was that the way that came together is that Paul McCartney saw our demo, and then he said, "Can you come tomorrow and shoot us at Candlestick Park?" And we said, "Sure, Sir Paul." And we showed up with 2 cameras, and I wasn't there, unfortunately, and we had no ticket, no email, nothing. We showed up at Candlestick Park, like, "Can you please let us in?" And they let us in eventually, and Paul McCartney said, "Well, put the camera right by the piano and put one right in front of the stage," and we recorded the whole thing. The last concert at Candlestick Park, so we have like tons of footage. But the challenge, there were two big challenges with it. First of all, the back, the audience is very dark, and there's a lot of noise in the sensor. And sorry, it's a GoPro, but the GoPros are just not very good in the dark, and that was a big challenge. So and what happens then, the software and the GoPro basically starts blurring out the noise, right? So you get very splotchy, dark faces, and everybody immediately, once they see, oh, it's Candlestick Bar, they go look for themselves in the audience, right, if they were there. So we've had a few people just say, oh, it's terrible. And then the other part is, of course, that there's huge brightness changes, and that was another challenge. And then, you know, the thing that made it work, though, was like afterwards he did a remix of the audio at the studio in London, and that made it work. And the audio is really what brought it all together for us. But that was a really fun project. That was our first real VR production.
We shot Kaiju Fury in low light, and it worked really well also with the GoPro cameras. We have about 10 more minutes, so let's chat about length a little bit. Length of a project and the future.
I wanted to cover that we solved that problem because they were shooting on older Hero 3 cameras, and there's a Hero 4 out now. And everybody knows we are also coming out with our own rigs that solve a lot of these issues. So, good things to come.
So I want to get two more things, like length of a project and distribution, and like getting it out to people. So.
Like an opinion on how long?
Yeah, about like where are we now? Are people going to watch a feature film or 40
Depends on the
minutes?
project. All depends.
I think it's
Yeah.
called YouTube. No, I'm gonna call it YouTube. We're just gonna call it. No, Jump. The hope with Jump is that, well, actually, it's gonna happen. YouTube is going to support 360 stereoscopic footage, which is gonna be huge. So the hope is that, you film your 360 stereo or mono content, you can put it on YouTube, and finally people can see it. Because the biggest pain point is this accessibility, right? Wow,
Yeah.
almost messed that one up. No one can really film, and no one can see what has been filmed. And the biggest part about this format succeeding is experience. So no one can share their experiences, and then no one can see the experiences that are few and far between anyway. So I think the future in terms of distribution is going to be huge. It's going to be the way that this survives and becomes a thing. And if no one can experience anything, that's going to be a big problem. And I think that's also going to lend itself to more and more, it's part of the heart and soul of Jump is the accessibility part. Like, we want to be able to get cameras in the hands of people who normally aren't able to share their experiences this way. That includes people that normally don't have that chance as filmmakers, generally. Not to play the gender card here, but women, getting it into the hands of cultures that are dying, really focusing on diversity, really trying to go for that stuff and really getting ahead of it, and introducing this vastness of experience to everyone else, or anyone wants to experience it themselves. So. It's huge. Length, going from that to length, it's tough. I mean, cardboard, you hold it up with your hand. There's obviously a pain point to that, right? You're gonna put it up on your face, and you're gonna be like, okay, great. You're gonna watch it for a time. Oculus, strapped to your face so you can watch it for a little bit longer than that. So I think it's tough. I know some people now that actually have tried this stress test, and they've survived for 40 minutes in a headset, and I just do not understand how that's possible. But maybe as we become more used to this format, maybe it's tough.
I know when we're editing, it's like 40 minutes, an hour and a half goes by, and it's like, oh, I've had this headset on for
But then
that
I
long.
use Tilt Brush, and I would be able to be in there for hours.
Yes.
Like, I could be there painting my dog for days and probably wouldn't realize the real world existed, which is a little scary. But
Another question?
but yeah, I guess it really depends on what it is and the format and the headset and everything.
Oh.
What's up?
You should play the game Elite Dangerous.
Thank
That's
you.
all you gotta do. It's
Elite Dangerous?
Yeah, there's definitely gamers that have gone hours in headsets. So.
Days. I have seen it.
stick, so even the hands of the game are doing the same thing as me. It's insane.
That's crazy. Yeah, I guess I was thinking more just like filmic content. But then once you start actually talking about games and things where you have objectives.
Got a reason to have it on for 3 or 4 hours for that game. It's kind of ridiculous.
Okay, wow, all right.
Yeah.
all right.
Elite Dangerous is amazing. Try it.
Nice plug, nice plug, nice
Oh,
plug, nice plug.
thanks.
So we focus on sort of snackable pieces, 3 to 5 minutes at most. This is working. And unfortunately, we recently recorded The Grateful Dead, and their shortest song is 15 minutes. So in terms of length, that's a little challenging. But I think that will change, and I think you're right that it's all about the headset experience. I don't know if anybody's tried the Avagon Glyph. That's a headset that you can, wear as a headphone. And that one is interesting because you can actually see under it a little bit, and it really improves the usability of it because I can find my cup of coffee. When I'm on the plane, I can wear it for a much longer period of time. So that's maybe a style of headset that might lend itself for longer viewing. Yeah.
And I personally love Avagon because you can plug a Bubble cam into and live stream. It's great, but at the same time, the screen itself is very different than the HMDs you're going to get from other people. I don't know how immersive it feels.
Well,
but
so it's
cool.
It's a very different screen technology, right? It's a MEMS array, and the quality of the screen is actually very good. The field of view is very narrow, so you have more of an idea that you're watching a big screen TV in front of you, and you still look around, still has head tracking, but the field of view needs to improve. But I'm hoping that will improve over time. But the type of display that they're using is better than an OLED display because you see no pixels.
True.
That is nice about it.
I'd say how many people here have created content for a VR platform?
All
Have,
right.
have any of
All
you
right.
created
Awesome.
something longer than 5 minutes?
Why?
What's the
10
longest?
minutes. Yeah.
12 minutes.
12 minutes.
Is it educational?
No, it's beach.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
There you
that'll
go.
work, yeah, that's true.
So there's these obviously knowing all these technical considerations we're talking about time for platforms is there's definitely, we're working on content, lots of people are working on long form content and seeing just what that threshold barrier is, both from a psychological, technical, and creative standpoint. There's a lot of variables. Her threshold is going to be totally different from mine as far as how long she can tolerate it versus I can. Maybe it's eye strain. Maybe it's just
I don't
the
like
story.
beaches, and maybe that really bugs me.
Maybe she just wants to live in a game the whole time. So there's all these different things. Each one of us has a totally different threshold of how long we can be in this environment, and that's got to be thought
I'm a
of,
big
too.
fan of cardboard for that reason, because cardboard is a very social experience. You're using it, you're passing it on. It's interactive, and it's not a commitment. You're not strapping it on forever like you sometimes feel with some of these systems. And the Vive, I love the Vive. It's beautiful. The experience is fantastic. But it's a the setup and the headset. It is.
It's a commitment, isn't it?
It's
Yeah.
a commitment,
Yeah.
right? And one of the most interesting platforms that I think of the year, I think, will be the ViewMaster, because that's going to be a cheap version, a high quality version of cool cardboard that's going to be aimed at a young audience. And it's coming with some really cool apps and some great content, and it will educate a new generation of kids, how to do VR. And it's also not strap-on, right? It's like you're looking at it and then handing it over to your little brother to see it, and to your mom, and all the content that we're creating here today will work on it, which is great.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. I was just gonna say, we're starting to see a lot of people create short form content, long form content, a little bit of both. It really just comes down to the context. And we had a video of some guy who strapped a bubble cam to his I wouldn't call it a wheelchair, and he drove down the street, went through Target, went through every aisle of Target, talked to people, hung out, and then went on his merry way. And at first we were like, okay, why did this guy do this? But then we watched it, and we watched the interactions, and then other people would watch it, and we did it through Google Cardboard. We had the ones with the straps on them. And we passed it around, and people sat there and watched it, and he shot it for 40 minutes, right? and it's like a 40-minute long, just this guy's life. And that's when we started to see this reality push perspective really start to build. So when we start to look at creating real world content versus creating a piece, the length of time that it's going to take to create that piece, or the length of time you're going to spend with the headset, we're going to start to see that change a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's more like one of the big things that maybe it should be obvious to everybody probably, but it's the discoverable aspect. Like just like, okay, I'm in this world. I'm not like at NASCAR and I know I'm going to see some cars. Like you go to Target and you're like, what am I doing here? Like, why are we going through all these aisles? And it's actually kind of amazing how those experiences in someone else's mind that is not something that's predictable or something that you'd be used to or something you've seen on TV really lends itself to long form versus the other stuff, which maybe lends itself to shorter pieces.
Well, long form for education and science and research is a big part that people haven't fully experienced is being with Jump, the educational side of how that can roll out is people that will never experience, for whatever reasons, will never see the beach, will never be able to be at Vanuatu because who knows, maybe that whole island just goes boom because it's a volcano. So things that are gone, that won't be here, that we can still basically transport ourselves to that environment. CG mixed with live action. There's a lot of play within shooting live action plates within a CG environment. A good example is Help, that Justin Lin directed. That's a really well done piece of live action plate capture mixed with the CG environment. There's going to be that mix of shooting spherical content with traditional green-blue screen. That will save a lot of pain points, but also give content creators a lot of options as to issues you may go into, whether it's stereoscopic, if you want to put something in Z space a little bit closer than you would if it's a CG object. There's these choices that all of us have to do that. But when we talk about like these lengths and the story and what's driving the creative decision to shoot in whatever environment and what distribution we have is really going to be predicted by what is that longevity of that piece. Like, is it just something that lives there and it's like, oh yeah, man, I downloaded that app when that movie came out and let me delete that because it's not something you can go back to. But if it's like discoverable in terms of I want to go back to that beach experience in Hawaii, or something you can go back to from a memory thing, and that's what's really cool about shooting in a spherical environment is that sometimes you will want camera movement, and as things get better technologically for that, dealing with motion blur and all this, is that even if you wanted to take a bunch of GoPros or Bubl Cam or any other camera and just put it on the table and shoot your kid's birthday, and then you get to relive that 30 years later with your kid at their 8th birthday, that's an amazing thing that you would have, like people that have passed on, or the house that you guys used to live in, like all these really cool things that drive like a lot of emotion is pretty special that people haven't fully thought about the good sides of all that spherical can deliver, like as a memory, box, because we're so used to seeing 2D pictures as memories. Well, what if you had that whole environment captured the whole time and you can step back into that place and time?
That
Memory
makes sense.
vault.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I want to shoot Donald Trump's inauguration speech.
Oh, God.
Because that will be a piece to remember.
I don't want to. Do I want to remember that though?
So sadly,
But
we're almost.
I'm somewhat serious. Like a special event, like like that. Like Obama's inauguration speech would have been great to have in VR. He was a little early, but the next one we can at least catch. But those pieces will last, right? You will always be wanting to go back to that and relive that. The first black president, the first female president, whatever it's going to be.
It's the living history book.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Or your mom making you dinner. I mean, I would want to just be, with the nature of the job and launching and stuff like that, you have to travel a lot. I just like want to be able to like
Yeah.
see my dog or something. I don't know.
So we're sadly almost out of time, and we can do an entire day on pipeline, but we're going to take just a few questions. The gentleman here in True had a question a while ago, or you can get Brian.
They can hear you,
Him.
probably.
Just shout.
Yeah, shout it.
Your mic is
Shout.
Shout.
Oh.
I was just wondering how, with regards to the pipeline and post-pipeline, you guys tackle problems like stereo with super wide angle lens, and because it'll distort the whole thing, and just a little bit about post-pipeline.
So how to deal in post with stereo and wide-angle lenses and the distortion.
Yes.
What's awesome about that is we have software that does it. It's called Color, but you can also use Jump. No, in terms of tool sets that you can use, obviously, I'm biased to the Color tool set. There's a lot of tools out there that get you a certain amount of the way, but even though it may do stitching in there, there may be correction tools in Nuke that are a little bit more optimized, coming from like the Oculus subset and a lot of other cool things that they're working on that are from a very high-end visual effects standpoint, allow you to do a lot more manual manipulation as far as lens profile corrections, things like that. There's a lot of this cool stuff that's in just off the shelf stuff. Like there's a really cool subset of working closely with Adobe is that they have all our lens profiles built into all of After Effects, Lightroom, Photoshop, and Premiere Pro. So if you happen to do a traditional way and maybe you do some manipulation of the plates before you stitch them, you can basically fix any of the distortion with tools in, if you're a Creative Cloud user, if you use Color, if you use other tools out there, you've got some choices as to that. And I would say from the GoPro standpoint is we've tried everything, from open source stuff through to the stuff we use day in, day out with Color and Nuke and you name it. So I think there's a lot of subset of tools out there. I would say there's not one package to rule them all right now.
No, Color, Video Stitch, PT GUI, about it.
So we have a pipeline, that can take GoPro footage or Neo footage or Ozo and render that. And you don't deal with the lens distortion after that, right? You have a spherical video that you can then use for post-production and color correction and editing. That, you want to get that out of the way. Ideally, that would come out of the camera right away, but we're not quite there yet.
Oh, unless you have a bubble cam.
So
No
just
stitching.
one
Forget
more
it.
question, and this guy on the end here.
Just as like a charter member of the Society for the Prevention of Bad VR, you can't start without the writer. And I know the audience said, technical, but I say, when you're writing for VR, you're actually writing with your whole body as a writer. So I would just appreciate it if you could address the screenwriting aspects of VR quickly, because without the story and without the writer, that's the first place in the pipeline.
Well, you have to have. I hope you have a good story before you
Story
start shooting.
first before you
Yeah.
ever buy a
Yeah.
piece of gear.
Yeah.
Screenwriting for VR.
Well, I think people have been screenwriting for VR for a long time. It's just we haven't been able to put all the context on the screen, right? Like I think that one of my like personally bad creative problems when it came to screenwriting was that I'd write too much in the beginning. Like, okay, I have to set the scene and make sure like everyone understands the mood and like how they're feeling, what they're wearing, and all that stuff. And then you basically create what is essentially these pockets of worlds. Like each scene was a world. And then it was just like the dialogue in it. But then inevitably it was just like, okay, but really all people are paying attention to, hopefully if you did your job right, enough of the nuance was there, or if you shot it right, the mise en scène was right, like that you could actually feel what the writer meant when they wrote their stuff. But I feel like now you can, you go through the Coen brothers' old scripts and you like look through it and you're like, these guys totally could have done, or can do VR. Like Hitchcock would have been fantastic. Fellini. If you think of we could go through all like film
Kubrick.
school. Kubrick. Yeah, really good.
That'd be scary. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Where it's like, it's there. It's funny to go through old scripts and actually see how that is. That said, there's going to be more of an emphasis on like, mood and, you know, the elements of that mood and light. Like, you can actually start, you almost want to, and like we were talking about, writing it as if you were going to edit it tomorrow. Like, understanding sort of the paint, like editing in VR and kind of what that means, and then writing more towards that might.
Yeah. Well, that's where.
Well, there's like a huge connection between POV shooting and as well and VR-based shooting. So if you look at films that have this whole POV standpoint, this like that whole effect where it's like, okay, I'm going to shoot like I'm the guy in the film and I'm talking to my friends and the dialogue's going back and forth. A lot of the times when you start lighting that, you think about setting the entire mood for a walkthrough where everyone's going to be involved in that particular scene. So if you start looking at that type of screenwriting in general, you can start to evolve that for this particular model as well. We started with that originally when we started to think about, well, how do we set up a scene? Well, let's walk through a scene. Let's see how it feels. Let's see how the communication goes with the dialogue between the people in the actual area. And we noticed, oh, we're shooting like POV. We're actually using GoPros to
You
just
almost have
shoot
to
the-
write it for like what the person's going to actually experience. Like, you're writing for experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly,
so
yeah.
you're gonna
Right.
see,
All POV.
you're gonna see
I
a
got-
lot
I
of
got you. I got you.
game
Yeah,
writers
100%.
joining the Screen Actors Guild.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because
What-
first-person shooters, you know, first-person POV games, they've got it figured out already.
The Writers Guild.
Yes.
One more question.
Writers Guild, yes. Join the guild.
I think my question can be specifically for you, Shannon.
Oh, okay.
So we've talked about higher frame rates and massive amounts of data sets, and maybe the amount of time rendering in the cloud, and you know, all this like it looks better on stereo. Now, is the client gonna pay 50/60? Like, is he really gonna pay for the whole world now, or are we? So is this like a pivotal point where studios can take like the power and say like, you want a VR experience, great, stereoscopic, amazing, fantastic. VR experience, you're gonna pay for that, or are we seeing more like clients?
They are.
It's more of the same. They just wanna, you know, go through.
Oh yeah, we didn't
There's a
cover
huge
budgets.
range of budgets
We
from
didn't
like
cover
thousands
budgets.
of dollars to several $1 million. So I think one of the highest I've heard of is 7 million. And
And probably had to turn around in a week.
no, it wasn't a week. But yes, the studios are paying for it as more and more content gets out there, and it's like any other distribution and business model. It's digital content. It's going to follow a lot of those same business models, and the budgets will be there. But yeah,
I would say that there
effects
is a
on
lot
60
of,
FPS is different
yeah,
than
but there's-
24.
Yeah, and the good thing about it is there's actually quite a bit of people that want to give all of us money to create good content for these new platforms, because it's starved for content. It's like
Yeah.
in that same way that people are starved for stereo content, it's the same way for VR, and it's the same thing. There's a lot of bad content right now because a lot of people are still figuring out things, and it'll get better and better and better. So, you know, I've never seen trade shows and or exhibits where VCs were coming to exhibit and saying, we want to hear about your stuff because we want to give you money. That is like, that shows you that there is a lot of backing and a lot of excitement between this platform and these immersive movements. And they're going to change quickly. They're going to change very quickly. You got to kind of roll with the punches, be able to adapt quickly, you know that the technology you buy right now may be outdated very soon.
Like
You
in a
know.
week or two. But also, like any digital content, it's you've got to market it. Think about your audience, who you're making it for, and you know, really being out there. It's hard enough for films to get people to come. So imagine even, you know, VR right now is sexy, but you're still going to be competing with a lot of other content. So I think that's going to be it. Thank you so much. Thank you to our amazing panelists. Thank you, VRLA.